In a world of glass and steel, Christopher Langston was king. By 35, he'd built an empire from the ruins of his father's legacy, a fortress of wealth so vast it cast a shadow over the city. He was a man who commanded boardrooms with a glance, whose name was whispered with fear and awe. And everything a man could want: power, influence, a portfolio that defied logic, everything, except the woman he'd let walk away. He thought she was just a ghost, a phantom from a past he'd carefully buried. He thought she was gone for good. Until today, she didn't reappear in a storm, but with the quiet gravity of a planet returning to its orbit. There she was, standing in the marble lobby of Langston Enterprises, her face a painting of strength and sorrow. The years had sharpened her beauty, carving away softness and leaving a resilience that was both stunning and intimidating. But it wasn't just her that made Christopher's world stop. It was the 3 small children standing beside her, 2 boys and a girl no older than 5, clinging to her hands. As his gaze fell on them, the air left his lungs. They had her smile, her posture, but they had his eyes. Unmistakably, terrifyingly his. Now, standing before him were 3 secrets he never knew he had. 3 living, breathing consequences of a night he'd spent years trying to forget. But to understand why she came back, to grasp the years of silence and the story carved into her face, we have to go back to the night it all fell apart. 5 years ago, Christopher Langston was a prince awaiting his crown. Maya was the one piece of his life that didn't fit the blueprint of his ambition. She was a brilliant, fierce artist whose soul was painted in colors too vibrant for his grayscale world of mergers and acquisitions. Their love was a secret fire, a passionate rebellion against the cold, calculated future laid out for him. He loved her spirit, the way she saw the world, not as a balance sheet, but as a masterpiece waiting to happen. But his family, especially his mother, Eleanor Langston, saw her differently. To them, Maya was a liability. A beautiful, intoxicating distraction from a destiny forged in old money and ruthless power. The pressure mounted, a slow, crushing weight on Christopher's shoulders. Day after day, Eleanor's words dripped like poison in his ear. She isn't one of us, Christopher. She'll make you soft. A man building an empire can't afford the luxury of a muse. The end came on a cold, rainy night in his sterile penthouse overlooking the city. The argument started as it always did with his family, with his future, but this time he didn't defend her. He looked at Maya, the love of his life, and saw a complication he could no longer afford. "This isn't working, Maya," he said, his voice empty of the warmth she once knew. He slid a check for an obscene amount of money across the marble countertop. "I want you to be secure," he said, closing a business deal. "But my world, the one I'm building, there's no room in it for double quotes he didn't have to finish." Maya looked at the check, then back at him, her heart shattering. But her pride, the one thing his money could never buy, held her together. She didn't cry or scream. She simply pushed the check back at him. "You can keep your gilded cage, Christopher," she whispered. "I hope your empire keeps you warm at night." She walked out with nothing but her clothes and the dignity he'd just tried to purchase. He watched her go, the rain plastering her dress to her skin as she vanished into the night. He told himself it was necessary, a sacrifice for the empire. It was a choice that would echo through the silent years, a silence he would one day pay anything to fill. Soon after she disappeared from Christopher's world, Maya discovered his true parting gift. It wasn't the check on the counter, but the life her lives growing inside her. The shock of pregnancy was a tidal wave, but the first ultrasound brought a tsunami. Not 1 heartbeat, but 3. Triplets. The news was terrifying. Impossible. She was alone, heartbroken, jobless, and suddenly responsible for 3 lives she'd never planned for. The years that followed were a blur of struggle and sacrifice. Maya moved to a tiny apartment miles from the glittering skyscrapers of Christopher's world. She worked 3 jobs, scraping by to make ends meet: a waitress by day, a freelance graphic designer by night, a cleaner on weekends. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her artist's hands, meant for a paintbrush, grew raw from dishwater and cleaning chemicals. Her life was a relentless cycle of feeding, changing, and worrying. The exhaustion was a constant ache in her bones. And yet, in that chaos, there was a profound, fierce love. Her children, Noah, Leo, and Amara, became her entire universe. 3 little anchors keeping her from drifting into despair. The struggle wasn't just financial, it was emotional. One winter night, when the kids were barely 2, Leo's breathing became ragged, a severe asthma attack. Maya's heart seized with cold fear. She bundled her other 2 sleeping children in blankets, carried all 3 down 3 flights of stairs in the freezing cold, and raced to the emergency room. Sitting under the harsh hospital lights, watching her tiny son struggle for every breath, she felt a loneliness so deep it almost broke her. Her wallet was nearly empty, and there wasn't a single person she could call. In dark moments, Christopher's face would flash in her mind. The temptation to call him was a nagging whisper. One phone call and the hardship would disappear. But then she'd remember his cold eyes, the money he'd offered for her to just go away. Her pride, now an iron shield, would rise up. These were her children. She brought them into this world alone, and she would raise them alone. She wouldn't let them be seen as a liability in the Langston dynasty. She had to protect them, not just from poverty, but from the cold, transactional world their father had chosen. So she kept going. 5 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories sung in a tired voice, and birthdays celebrated with a single cupcake and 3 candles. In those 5 years, Maya the artist died and was reborn as Maya the warrior mother. She shielded her children from the truth of their father, not out of bitterness but to protect their innocence. She built a fortress of love around them, a world where they were safe and cherished. For 5 years, Maya's pride was an unbreakable wall. She had built a life, however hard, on her own strength. Going back to Christopher was never part of the plan. But life can throw something at you that no wall can withstand. It wasn't a moment of weakness that sent her back. It was a moment of terrifying clarity. Leo's asthma was getting worse. The cheap inhalers from the free clinic weren't enough. Doctors spoke of specialists, allergy tests, and a level of care galaxies beyond her means. They mentioned environmental triggers, suggesting their old, dusty apartment could be making him sick. They needed to move. They needed better insurance. They needed things she simply couldn't give them. One afternoon, waiting for a bus, she saw his face on a magazine cover. Christopher Langston, colder and more powerful than ever, under the headline, "The Untouchable King: How Christopher Langston Conquered the World." The article detailed his billions, his ruthless strategies, and the future of the Langston name. In that moment, something inside her snapped. This was no longer about her broken heart or wounded pride. This was about her children. It was about Leo, who deserved to breathe without struggling. It was about Noah and Amara, who deserved a future, free from the shadow of poverty. They had a right to know their father, and more than that, they had a right to the birthright in their blood. His legacy wasn't just in skyscrapers and stock prices. It was in the 3 kids who shared his DNA. The decision was the hardest she'd ever made. It meant facing the man who shattered her world and exposing her children to the power and wealth she'd fought to shield them from. It meant confronting his family, especially his mother, who would look at them with nothing but contempt. But that evening, watching her children draw on the floor of their cramped living room, she knew she had no other choice. She wasn't going back as a beggar asking for scraps. She was returning as a mother, ready to fight for her children's future. This wasn't a surrender. It was an act of war. And so, she stood in the lion's den. When Christopher finally unfroze in the marble lobby, he waved off security and led her to his private office on the top floor. The silence in the elevator was deafening, filled with 5 years of unspoken words. The children, sensing the tension, huddled closer to Maya. Inside his office, a vast space of glass and chrome overlooking the city, Christopher turned to her. His famous composure, the armor he wore daily, was cracked. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "After all this time, Maya, why now?" Maya stood tall, her gaze steady. "This isn't about you, Christopher," she said calmly, "and it isn't about me. This is about them." She gestured to the 3 small children at her side. "This is Leo, Noah, and Amara. They're your children." She laid out the story of the last 5 years, not with tears, but with the cold, hard facts of her struggle. The late-night jobs, the tiny apartment, Leo's asthma, every word was a stone dropped into the quiet pool of his ignorance, sending shockwaves of guilt across his face. For the first time in years, the king was powerless. Billions couldn't buy back the 5 years he'd missed. They couldn't erase the image of Maya alone, rushing their sick child to the hospital. They couldn't build a time machine to see their first steps or hear their first words. He slowly knelt, bringing himself to eye level with the children. They stared back, a mix of curiosity and fear in their faces. He looked from one to the other, seeing his own features mirrored back at him. He saw his stubborn jaw in Noah, his thoughtful gaze in Amara and in Leo, a vulnerability he recognized in himself. He felt a connection so primal it was both terrifying and thrilling. "Daddy," Amara whispered, and with that one word, Christopher Langston's entire world crumbled. The empire, the deals, the endless chase for more, it all felt like meaningless noise. He'd spent 5 years building a kingdom of glass and steel, only to realize he'd abandoned his true legacy in a small apartment across town. Christopher's perfect world is in pieces. He now has to choose between the empire he built and the family he never knew he had. What do you think he should do? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you're hooked on this story, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Christopher's first instinct was to fix things the only way he knew how, with money. Within 24 hours, he'd moved Maya and the triplets into a lavish penthouse in his building. He hired the best doctors for Leo, filled their rooms with every toy imaginable, and set up trust funds to secure their futures. He thought he was solving the problem. He was wrong. The real fight began when he introduced them to his mother. Eleanor Langston, a woman of ice and ambition, saw Maya's return not as a miracle, but as a calculated attack. The reunion took place at the Langston family estate, a cold, imposing mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. Eleanor looked Maya and the children up and down with pure contempt. "You show up after 5 years, right when the Langston name is more powerful than ever," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Convenient." A tense family dinner was arranged, a stage set for Eleanor's cruelty. She made cutting remarks all night, questioning the children's parentage under her breath and making snide comments about their humble upbringing. Maya sat in dignified silence, enduring it for her children's sake. The breaking point came when Eleanor said with a cruel smile, "I suppose we'll need to hire tutors to correct their manners. One can't expect refinement when they've been raised in, well, you know." The table went silent. Christopher stared at Maya, seeing not the girl he'd let go, but the powerful, unshakable woman she'd become. Then he looked at his mother and saw her, for the first time, not as a matriarch, but as a bitter, empty woman. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "That's enough, Mother," he said, his voice firm. He walked over to stand behind Maya, placing his hands on her shoulders. "They are my children. They are Langstons, and Maya is their mother. They aren't going anywhere. If you can't treat them with the respect they deserve, you won't be a part of their lives. The choice is yours." It was the first time he had ever defied his mother. In that moment, he wasn't just choosing Maya and the kids. He was choosing the man he wanted to become. That dinner was the turning point. Christopher began a slow, clumsy, but sincere journey from billionaire to father. He started canceling meetings to be home for dinner. He traded boardrooms for playgrounds. The man who commanded global markets couldn't make pancakes that weren't burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. He learned to read bedtime stories with ridiculous voices that made the triplets explode with giggles. He was there for every one of Leo's doctor's appointments, holding his small hand a quiet promise of protection. One evening, after the kids were asleep, he found Maya on the balcony. He stood beside her, silent for a long time before turning to her. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling small for the huge gap of time and pain between them. "Not just for that night. I'm sorry for being a coward. For choosing a legacy of buildings over a legacy of family. I'm sorry for every day I missed. I was a fool who traded a universe for a kingdom, and I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just asked for one thing. "Please, Just let me be their father." Maya didn't fall into his arms. The wounds were too deep. But she saw the change in his eyes. She saw the way he looked at their children, with a love that was real and unconditional. For their sake, she agreed to try, to co-parent, to build something new from the wreckage. Their new reality wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, complicated, and beautiful. It was shared calendars and arguments over bedtime. It was Christopher learning their teachers' names, and Maya learning to let go of the control she'd held so tightly for 5 years. The focus slowly shifted from their broken past to their children's bright future. The triplets, caught between these two worlds, began to thrive. They had a mother who could finally breathe, and a father who was learning, day by day, what it truly meant to be there. He was a billionaire who thought he owned the world. But she was a woman who had built her own, rich with a love his money could never buy. Their story wasn't about a prince saving a pauper. It was about a king who had to learn from a warrior queen what true wealth really was. The final scene of their new chapter isn't a wedding, but something more real. It's a sunny afternoon in the park. Christopher is on his hands and knees, a mock monster as Noah and Leo climb all over him. Maya is on a blanket with Amara, teaching her to braid a daisy chain. They're laughing. They're a family, not a perfect one, but a real one. He's no longer just Christopher Langston, the billionaire. He's daddy, and she's no longer just a struggling single mother. She is the heart of a new legacy, one built, not on power, but on forgiveness. In the end, Christopher Langston learned that a true empire isn't built from glass and steel, but from the unbreakable bonds of family. What did you think of Christopher and Maya's journey? For more stories that will have you hooked, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. You can click right here to watch another one of our top stories.